So on this stage, we're going to start our conversations about money. And I hesitate to use that word because we don't really want to talk about conventional money. We want to take the conversation right back to base principles and talk about basically agreements. Because after all, if money is an agreement, then really, if we want new types of money, all we need are new agreements. And we're going to focus here on what sort of signals and transactions are appropriate within a collaborative, sustainable economy. After all, if you want to do some business with someone, then you just need to really make a signal to say, I have this thing that I either want to sell or I want to buy, and then that leads on to a transaction. So we're not necessarily talking about crypto, we're not necessarily talking about ICOs, and we don't want to get distracted by technical implementation. We want to actually talk about the kind of base principles. And I think the three speakers that we've got, Michael Linton here, who is the designer and founder of the original LETSystem, and Sheron, who's a technology transfer consultant, who's going to talk to you about Happonomy, and Matthew, who's the director of communications at Holo. They're all going to have some very interesting perspectives for you. So hopefully this will be an interesting session.
First thing I wanted to do, though, was to pick up on Gary's quick check on reality. I wanted to extend it one shot. That proposition of a world of connected co-ops, he proposed could be done in maybe 5 or 10 years, very optimistic, and we all thought it was a good idea, or most of us. How about if it could be done in 1 year? Would that be okay for it being done in 1 year? Can I see a show of hands for people who would think it would be fairly good if that was happening fast as well as slow? Good. Now, I notice there's bound to be a little confusion about that sort of thing. So the second question I always want to ask is, suppose next year when you came to this conference, instead of having to fork out some cash and see that the money is all going to flow through and disappear into hotels and airplanes and stuff like that, how about if everybody who came to the conference was compensated for their time and effort? Would that work? Show of hands? Okay, just checking. Back to money. Thank you. The three questions that we were asked to deal with was, what are the signs we're going to see as appropriate to the economy, and what's the nature of money we want, and what types are going to be appropriate? The signs that I'm looking for are signs of life. If an entity doesn't contain its own forms of self-maintenance and creation, then it's not alive. If it has to be supported from outside, forget it. So if your currencies or your models of money are independent of subsidies from governments or grants or ICOs or venture capitalists, then you're in a much better shape. In fact, the currency should be a recirculating of energy and reciprocity in that community of its users. We need to be looking for ethical contribution in the event of our transactions, so that what I do with Joe is good for the whole of us, rather than what I do with Joe is basically taking a slice out of our common wealth. So we want monies that are contributive rather than extractive. Biomimicry is critical. That's been going on for a long time, and it's got a good track record. It works. So anything that we're doing with our social organizations, which are, of course, entirely abstract, would do well to take a learning from the biomimicry issue. Do what works. And in nature, systems are multiple, they're redundant, they're self-organizing, and they reduce entropy. And that's what we need to be doing with our monetary systems. They don't at the moment. Nothing in the real world, the biological world, is anything like the money that we live by in our social systems. Nature just simply doesn't entertain such abstractions. There's also the issue of, are we interested in what we got or what we're doing? And almost all economic issues are concerned primarily with what there is, the asset, the ownership, the property. And our basic monetary models are property movement money as well. Money, the national money, is the property of the national system. It's not your money. Even if it's in your pocket, it's just you've got it in your pocket, but it's not your money. And we're always juggling property and being concerned with how much we've got. So it's sort of the quarterly report, what's my balance, have I gained, have I lost? We're aware that things flow away when we spend, and we're aware that they flow to us when we're earning, but that's as much as we're concerned with the flow. We're principally holding on to the asset. And the issue is we've got to start looking at how the flows work, where they go, and how they interact across an entire community. And my machine has stopped, starting again. This leads us to the concept of circular flow patterns. There's a lot of talk about the circular economy these days. You know, let's get things moving around, let's reduce the material waste, let's ensure that energy isn't wasted all over the place. But we're using a linear money to manage these affairs. Now, in any event in the world, of the economic event, I buy a hat from Ollie. The hat is the thing, the reality. The symbol that I pass back is our social abstraction. But you notice it's one and the other. And an alien from his spaceship looking down could be tracking the economy by watching what happens, the things, the services, the gifts, the interactions. Or they could be watching the money moving in exactly the opposite direction, because the two patterns are entirely identical and reciprocal. And then you have to ask yourself, which one is driving the pattern? And in our current economy, it's very clear that the pattern of material and energy flows, services, etc., is driven by a linear money, which is an extractive process and really does us an awful lot of damage. So, fortunately, circular money is actually very easy, so we don't need to worry much about that. That's how it's going to work. Now, sort of the reason for this is that the money, as far as I know, comes in two forms. You know, one of the questions here was, what forms of money do we want? I don't think that's a really good question. It's like asking what sort of gravity do we like? You know, you don't get to argue with gravity, and you don't get to argue with what money is. You can take a lot of choice about how you use it, how you define its applications, but money seems to work in two forms that I've discovered. One of them is the item of value, the token that moves between us. That token, that pound note, that whatever it is not mine, and its value is resident in the thing. So we have the things are moving, and I'm just a user, or am I being used? It's never very clear. On the other hand, there are monies which are simply measures of our relationship. Specifically, mutual credit is the widest and most explicit example of that. That there are no things in mutual credit. There are just levels of relationship and interaction and reciprocity and flow. So, as far as I'm concerned, there's token money, which is essentially competitive. Douglas Rushkoff has recently referred to it as a weaponized currency, and attributes the difficulty that cooperatives have in cooperating with each other. There, did I say something nasty? I think we are probably all familiar with the fact that cooperatives work very well internally, but have quite a lot of difficulty in working collaboratively across the economy. And in my belief, that's because the methodology we use, our mechanism for exchange, is a competitive money. And that is very dangerous stuff and does not support collaboration. However, when we have collaborative money, mutual credit, give and take, flow it around, what you send out comes back, it's all self-regulating in so many ways, then we can actually, I think, get a lot closer to true collaboration. Now, time is limited. I would have said that 30 years ago, too. It's getting more limited every damn year, every minute. We've got to do something about this. So the issue for me about what money we apply is money that bloody well works. I don't want trivial pursuits. I don't want get-rich-quick schemes. I want stuff that serves us in serving our community and our world. So, I'll leave it at that.
Hi, good afternoon. Before starting my presentation, just a bit of a context. What I'm illustrating today isn't actually my work, but I do believe in it a lot. It's actually something that we developed under Happonomy It sounds great. It's actually really straightforward. It's happy economics, what we're looking at. And more specifically, with a mission asking us the question, what do we need in life? So based on that very, I would say, important question which everyone has, we've actually derived into 5 big spheres where we want to focus on what we're doing, what kind of message we want to get out there. And one of them is, one of the spheres is feeling at ease. And I think feeling at ease for a lot of people is security, one instance, healthcare, but also feeling at ease, having, I would say, a healthy bank account, having no worries, being in that debt-free zone going forward. And that's actually how I met Stef Kuipers, who developed the money system that you'll be seeing later on. And he was actually, I saw him the first time in a bar really late at night, because he was like, yeah, I have a really nice idea. I think we have to shift on how we look at money and economy, and also where the power lies. And of course, I'm a tech transfer consultant, as Ollie said. I've said that to a lot of people today, and everyone was like, that's a posh name, you know, what do you do? And then I said, I help companies bring their technologies on the market. So this is not my core, I would say, forte, but I was looking at the money system with that in mind to see, okay, does it work, doesn't it work? So Steph started by saying, my money system is actually really straightforward. It's actually based on 2 basic notions. The first one is, we bring debt-free money in the circular element here. And I said, debt-free money, what does that mean? He said, like, yeah, we provide a basic income for everyone, but also projects of common good. And I was like, projects of common good? And that's actually a kind of basic service elements, like, for example, basic healthcare, education, police going forward, what you need to have a good working society and also a person going forward. And then I said, okay, basic income, and then what? And then he said, the second thing I also want to introduce in our, I would say, economic system is working with a kind of a demurrage fee. I don't know if you know what that is. That's actually a kind of a negative interest. The more you hoard your money, the more taxes you have to pay. And I said, is it that simple? Just a combination of a basic income, so debt-free income getting into the system, and also a demurrage fee, so that you're actually incentivized to not save a lot of money and to hoard and to go that capitalistic way forward. And he said, yeah, it's that simple. And then my next question, of course, was, okay, if I go to a company and people want to invest in it, how are we going to do that with the demurrage fee? And then Steph said, but I have another trick up my sleeve. And I'm like, okay, and what's that? And he said, you know what? If people, they have the demurrage fee that they have to pay, so that means they can save up to a cap, and everything else going up, they have to pay a tax. And he said, those people, the people itself, they can choose to transfer that demurrage fee to someone else in a project they believe in a company they believe in. So actually shifting from a return on investment to a return on value element going forward. And the more we talked about it and the more we looked at it, actually we saw a lot of benefits enabling that, and also what we think could help, I would say, in a co-op setting. I do have to say I'm a co-op virgin. But listening today of what a lot of people were telling us about unions, about putting that decentralization to the people as well, and also providing transparency, you know, no banks, no debts getting in there, that quality of life you have. And I would also say, because of basic income, the removal of fear. I think I talked with someone yesterday about, I also provide, as a tech transfer consultant, I provide IP strategies. And a lot of people don't want to share their knowledge, or I would say their trade secrets, because they think if I make it public, my added value will fall. But by doing that basic income and by enabling this, you encourage the removal of fear and also collaboration at the end of the trip going forward. But also, what this also does, that's why we call it the sustainable money system, you encourage sustainability. Why? Because this model doesn't work in a really quick win, I would say, marketplace with products with short life cycles going forward. And also, I think I completely agree with Michael as well, with the coins we were talking about. It also encourages flexibility of currencies, you know? It's open. You can see what works, what doesn't work, how broad you want to go, if you want to go local, if you want to go global even, and also mix it up with other flavors of transactions, of money that you're thinking about going forward. And I would say one of the key messages that we had with this system is really the shifting of a mindset, really going from an ownership approach, you know, capitalistic, to a real value flow model, which is enabled by having that circularity in the money system. This is another implementation. I think Michael's ideas and Matthew's ideas you're going to hear are also behind, I would say, this goal to get there together. Thank you.
I'll just say a couple of remarks to keep it brief. My perception of money is that money is something that enabled us to have interactions when we didn't have social relationship, right? That when there's social relationship, we don't generally use money. And in fact, many of us sort of intuitively feel like if we bring money into a relationship, it can actually be destructive of that relationship. If my sweetheart does the dishes, I don't normally tip her.
Why not?
Yeah. I'm hoping to have a healthy relationship. It's not that I undervalue the contribution. Some of what's happening there is that those forms of contribution in social relationship are actually about shifting our identity. They're actually about shifting from a me and a you as separate to a we. And that when I contribute to that we and you contribute to that we each start to perceive of ourselves in different ways as part of that interaction. Money works a little differently. Money is a tit-for-tat transaction. It enables us to not have that relationship, to not have to become a we, and yet still be able to do some kind of transaction. That's not a terrible thing, but it's a different thing. It fosters interaction absent relationship. There are the kinds of money that most of us use on a daily basis. There are the kinds of money that Michael is arguing, hey, we could do some different things here. We ourselves, the Holo chain team, we're working on different sorts of currencies as well, and alongside Michael and a bunch of others over a long time, we've been having discussions around what are the different kinds of currencies and what kinds of currencies go beyond just money. We think of currencies as sort of speech acts, essentially. With traditional money, the speaker that's allowed to speak is usually a Federal Reserve or some kind of national bank. As Michael said, you don't get to issue your own money in that system. You can use their money, but you don't get to be the issuer. From my perspective, that's actually there are larger political histories involved there, but that's also an integrity tool. Part of that system is that only those folks own the printing technology, right? And this is useful for making it so that money that was supposed to enable someone who isn't witness to my interaction with Michael, let's say, if I'm giving him a hat and he's giving me some money, somebody who doesn't witness that directly, nonetheless is able to recognize it later because they can see the money. But if that is not maintaining its integrity, if instead of giving him a hat, I could run a printer at my house, well, that undermines the integrity of that recognition system, and it leads to social breakdown. That's the worry. The hope for us is that some of the new cryptography tools can enable people to speak recognitions of contribution that have integrity despite anybody being able to do that kind of speaking. This opens up a whole new world of possibility in terms of forms of recognition that we can do. Now, for us, one of the projects we're creating is a web hosting marketplace, and we've come up with a mutual credit system that's mostly focused on fostering recognition of when somebody provides web hosting. And we're dialing that currency to do that particular thing, to foster that flow of interaction. But it's not the only currency that we're creating. It's the one that most people are going to pay attention to, but there are other signaling systems that we know we need as part of that ecosystem for it to function well. What kinds of signaling systems? Well, they're not necessarily transactional signals. Some of them are things like, what kind of latency do you have? How long does it take for your machine to respond to something? How often are you online? Is it that most of the time I go to try to get a website from you and you're not there? These kinds of, you could think of them as reputation signals, end up becoming really important forms of information in that community that help people decide, do I want to turn to this party or that? I may be willing to pay a higher price to this party if I know that they're always online and that they respond quickly, right? So for us, there's some really interesting stuff that goes way beyond our traditional conceptions of money, not just money that comes from a nation, but money that's just about recognizing transactions. There are much richer forms of signaling that we're able to do, and we're hopeful that that can enable much richer, sort of more interesting social organisms as a result. Thank you.
Well, excellent. Not quite sure where to go with all of that. So that was very exciting. I think the main thing that I heard, I really hear the biomimicry thing. I think that we're all sort of in agreement that nature's patterns that have been developed over such a long time are obviously something clever that we could base our design principles on. Then we'd be doing well. And we also heard about sustainable money and value flow there. So we seem to be suggesting perhaps that because there are different types of value here, value exchange that we're trying to reward people for, that ultimately perhaps that we're not talking about individual currencies. Perhaps we're entering a situation now in which we're suggesting that there should be multiple currencies for different things. Wondered if any of you care to talk to that.
I'll leave it to you guys. I think for me personally, as I said, the flexibility of currency is there. But I really believe that, like with languages, there's always a language to say something specific, and sometimes it also gets lost in translation. And I think it's important to have that language system there, because having one language for everything, I think that would be a really loss, one in society, and also definitely in our monetary system going forward.
Yeah, it's like you get a canvas and one crayon. Give me some art. Well, yes, you can do it, but you're so restricted, and nature's full of patterns that persist because they feed on themselves and they support themselves and they don't screw up the environment that they live in. So we need recursive circuits of behavior that are supported by these information signals. Because if we don't survive, we don't survive.
That's true.
Yeah, I agree. I think that for us, we didn't figure we were smart enough to come up with the currencies. We think there's going to be a whole bunch of experimentation where people try different things. Some of those are transactional currencies, some of those are sort of recognition things, and through trial and error, they'll go, ooh, this works better than this. And they'll start using that more, and we will see, I believe, over the coming years, a huge amount of innovation in that social coordination space.
I think that's, it brings me on to sort of wanting to talk about the relationship aspect that you mentioned. So getting back to the fact that you don't tip your sweetheart. I wonder whether the money that we have at the moment seems to have been especially good for having almost just individual transactions. I wonder if in the future that perhaps we'll have certain forms of currencies which work in different ways in order to incentivize repeat transactions, because from my understanding of the economies I've been involved in, where you actually know the person that you're interacting with and you're more likely to interact with them again, you tend to build up a relationship which is much deeper and hence more valuable than one in which you only have instantaneous and one-off transactions.
Absolutely. However, you've got to also consider the consequence of the geometry, the system that you're playing with. And one of the keys with mutual credit is that what you put out comes back. You get what you give, more or less. So the issue in a mutual credit thing is don't try to create relations. They will emerge from your behavior. As I trade with somebody in my network, I'm empowering them to trade with somebody else who's empowered to trade with somebody else. I don't know where it all happens. I mind my own business. And what I put out will basically flow back towards me. And the networks that emerge are emergent, not contrived or planned. So, we know this sort of Dunbar number concept that there's a certain size beyond which you've got to go to some sort of abstraction and otherwise organization because, a family of 150 people is difficult to keep track on, Now, a family of 5, much easier. And yeah, we're not going to use money inside there, except the monetization of the nod, the nudge, the hug. That's money in a form. It's a signal. And they create reciprocity and resonance. So you've got this entire spectrum that goes all the way from these very soft, informal, unaccountable in many ways, all the way through to the hard-edged hard money that's totally cash on the barrel, here it is. We need to keep working between those extremes rather than just polarizing to the edges.
Sheron.
Well, I agree there as well, but I also think that by putting the money side in an extreme, it's also better to have a value aspect there as well. That if you're investing in something or having the hard cash and trying to get something back, that it doesn't have to be only a cash back in money.
Oh, quite, yeah.
So I think I completely agree, with the value aspect, the nods, the hugs, the warmth that you were talking about. But I really would love to see that passion and compassion in the monetary system with the hard money going forward. Yeah, definitely.
Money with feelings.
Money with feelings, sure.
Interesting concept.
Yeah.
So you had talked about the individual transaction, but I think the thing that money has done, and I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, is actually the way in which price, which is sort of a result of money, communicates across really complex systems. So our money design has led to behavior at really large scale because money is essentially an information technology, right? And price communicates really well across supply chains, and it's basically because nobody's willing to take the hit of a loss. The price of copper goes up, the guy who's buying that copper and using it to make a shovel or something else, he's not going to take a loss, so he raises his prices. The person who's buying his product, and at the end of the line, somebody's getting a haircut, and they're going, wow, these haircuts are cheap and these ones are expensive. And they can't see why, but they can see that the price is low. And that drives them to move to that lower price as a general rule. So the money systems that we have at present lead essentially to a race to the bottom. Mm-hmm. They lead to a race to low prices, regardless of what the consequences are, because the person who's making the decision can perceive of the low price, but they can't perceive of the why. Yeah. The other forms of information about, they didn't pollute or they didn't treat their pollution, or they were using slaves, that gets lost in a system where there's no relationship all the way back. And so the other signals that can enable that other form of information to show up as well I think can result in a different behavior at a collective scale, right? So if I'm not just seeing this as cheap, I'm saying, we're seeing this today. Yes, it's cheap, but that's organic and fair trade. There's new signals available to me that can enable the larger system to steer differently. So I think what we're trying to foster and enable is much more dynamic versions of this different signaling.
I like that. It's a really good explanation of the different elements of the value that you're entering into. You know, we've kind of seen it with star ratings, or even, you know, like the Energy Star thing and how energy consumptive things are. It's very rare that you see anything about the number of slaves that were involved in producing the product. But how, I wonder, will that ever manifest? I mean, do you imagine a scenario where you go to buy a product and you see, you know, its carbon impact, its slave rating, its ethical rating, its everything else rating, and the price? I mean, surely that's going to be too complex for...
Plus the price. There'll be price at several levels. Plastic, for instance. What is the cost of plastic? What are we paying for it? What are we doing with it? You know, every damn thing that uses plastic ought to be value added through the chain, so that at the consumption point, the person who's using the plastic bag is paying for the damn thing's management, production, and disposal. Now, we can do this now. This is not difficult. It's outside people's perception. And in fact, the entire plastics industry was built on hiding the convenience of living off the externalities. Well, we've got to raise these things to our consciousness, and price is a damn good way of doing it. And I think the Happonomy model of, which is essentially rationing access.
That's it, yeah.
You see? Well, we've got scarcity issues. Scarcity of land, scarcity of time, scarcity of skills, materials, whatever. We don't need to have scarcity of money to confuse the thing. That's just bullshit. So it's complexity. We need an information model that matches the complexity of that which it relates to. This is Ashby. And what we've got at the moment is a bloody crude weapon, blunt instrument to the limit. Sorry, I'm getting a little ranty.
The point that you just made about, will it be on the label, essentially? No. There's not enough room on that label, and we don't all agree about what matters. I might not agree tomorrow with myself today, right? Like as individuals, we are changeable, and we face different contexts. If right now I'm looking for a place to eat that's cheap and fast, but tomorrow I'm going out with my sweetheart, and I want it to be nice, you know, and not too loud. I'm looking for different things. That's never going to fit on the label. Fortunately, we now have digital technologies. We don't have to have everybody using the same label. We can fit a whole bunch of information. In fact, we can fit almost infinite amounts of information, and we can have others compose that down. They can synthesize it so that when you go and look at the fish, you're seeing from the sources you trust about the attributes you care about, the information that's relevant to you. And you go, oh, no, not this. I want to buy that one instead, right? When I go and look that up, I get different information back because I care about different things. And I think that's, one, it's useful because it helps the individuals solve their own problems. But two, it leads to a different world. It leads to this, again, sort of better self-steering world without us all having to come into alignment about what's right. Because I think that the political realities of trying to do that are basically, there's a zero chance.
We're not going to vote on it.
No, and it's because the information that's relevant is always contextual. There is no one right set of information.
I mean, that's what I partly wrote my thesis about, encouraging environmentally responsible behavior, and a lot of it came down to the fact that if you want people to behave environmentally friendly way, then you need to incentivize them and give them the opportunity. Much though I understand all of those things, I still make some hideous environmental choices just because my circumstances dictate that I'm not left with any other options. So I kind of agree with you there, but I'm wondering how you see that information actually becoming accessible to us in reality and in real terms. So this fish that you mentioned, are we going to stick a QR code on that fish?
Probably. It's stuff along those lines.
Okay.
Or you do a search. I mean, there will be issues along those, things like that, yeah.
Okay.
And that all that QR code is just a reference. And it's not that that pulls you to a web page, it's that that's something that you then feed back into your own sort of preference. If I'm following Michael on money or something, right, it goes and gets his recommendations about that kind of thing, or his filters, et cetera.
Oh, you don't want to believe my ideas.
Yeah, fair enough.
No, but I think also, we were talking about that yesterday as well. I used to make sustainable products like 10 years ago. And it was really difficult to sell it to people because they thought it was inferior because recycled materials were used. It was really difficult to market it and say, okay, look, when you do this, you have an effect. You know, there's an incentive. But I think then I was at the narrative yesterday in the afternoon, and the first sentence that I heard is, making people care is very, very difficult. I think, or you can do it with building your money system in a way which enables that from the beginning, from not having, you know, the wrong companies doing it. But if you have it, try to have some kind of a push to have that caring aspect as well. I think you said it as well. I care that I have a good restaurant tomorrow, but it can change definitely. But I think having that narrative in the beginning is also very valuable at the end as well.
Brilliant. I could talk about this for hours with you guys, and we've actually only got a couple of minutes left, and there's tons of questions. The top one's had 9 votes now, so we'll cut straight to that. What are the panel members' thoughts as to the reasons why no alternative currency system has really gained traction yet, despite many attempts over a long period? Anyone?
The first bicycle was a bit of a problem. You had to have the ground for it. You also had to have the culture that understood that, yes, it might fall over, but it might also balance if you stayed on it for a while. And basically, the things that have happened with alternate currencies, and I've never used that word. I don't think these are alternate currencies that we're playing with. I think these are real money at a deeper level of meaning than the stuff that we're shoveled out these days. But that's an aside. I think it's a business case. These are not going to fall out the tree. Somebody's got to do some work, got to do good work. And they've got to produce products that people are willing to pay for, perhaps in the community money, perhaps in hard cash. But if they're not supporting themselves fiscally, what sort of a joke is that? Like running around carrying an airplane and say, look, see it fly. No, it's not flying. You're holding the damn thing up. Now, commercial barter, mainly in the US, is probably about 30 billion a year at the moment, and the operating budgets of the proprietors, the pigs in the middle, is about 3 billion, about 10% of their turnover. Now, that's a business model, and it works. Now, I don't like what they're doing, and it won't go much further, and it's self-defeating, but it points out that these things, if they can be done well, should pay their own way. And I think that's been a serious impediment for people's social change agendas. You know, we're poor people, we're working in an urban ghetto, we've got a problem with this, there's a problem with that. Help! And so you have things like time banks and the early LETSystems, which were sad, wonderful, wonderful, but sad. Look what they done to my tune, Mom. Anyway, I think it's just practice and context and urgency and awareness. And I think the world is reaching the point where we're ready for this stuff.
Yeah, I think one side of it is also time. It has taken us a really long time to get here. So actually we're going pretty fast with the new currencies coming forward as well. But I agree with Michael on that front. I think you really get to have it out there and start playing with it, thinking in a way which is completely out of your comfort zone, because we've been so, I think it starts when you're 4 years old, you know, working with money, with a price you get for doing something right. And to get that out, it's a psychological, I would say, terror on your brains to know, okay, this isn't the only system that works. And I think with that notion, we started with the system that we had, which I presented. We made a game out of it, a hardboard game. Instead of playing the colonist of Catan, which is the completely other bad civilization board, to just see, okay, how would you react if you had a money transaction in that way, because it's a completely different kind of thinking. And I think now we're providing solutions for a framework which has to be shifted a bit first, and then you can have, I would say, the communication, the conversation again, of what kind of currency systems do we want to have. Yep.
One thing I would say is it's really tempting to go, hey, these didn't work because they didn't take over traditional money. But that's not necessarily accurate. A lot of the currency systems that people have designed weren't designed to replace traditional money. They were trying to foster a flow of activity within a particular community. And they did that. They worked. They weren't intended to bridge beyond that community and do more generalized replacement of pounds or dollars or euros. They were a currency designed to do a thing, and they did that thing. We've seen some recent things in the crypto world that look like, oh wow, they might replace money, and those got lots of press. They may be speculative bubbles, they may actually be useful in some way. They got lots of press because they look like money, but let's not discount all those other things that people have been making use of and that are actually fostering real activity, real interaction.
It's like you throw a party and it only lasts 3 days. It was a failure.
Yeah, it didn't keep going.
No, this particular issue of the value that people have gained from these networks is unquestionable. But there's also the disappointment that they haven't taken it further, and that people don't buy beer and bread with this money, because basically, until it's something that manages some of your subsistence necessities and also some of your entertainments. Bread and circuses has always had a hell of a lot to do with how the world works. And these currencies have got to get to the level of working in the supermarkets, which incidentally is a reference to what I was talking about at the beginning. I hope it planted a bug in your ear. If you want to know what I'm actually talking about there, look at the proposal I put for the open space session and follow the links. And please come and talk to me about it if you wish to be entertained.